Hello friends, and welcome back to the Mothership. Today I'm going to answer that age-old question of can you smoke just a brisket flat and will it come out good on the Weber kettle? And the answer is obviously yes. I mean, it's the same thing with my pellet grill episode I did a couple months ago. Of course you can smoke a brisket flat and have a great brisket. Personally, I like the point the most, so I tend to steer towards those full packer briskets, but a brisket flat is a great way to get into smoking. It's a lot cheaper. Overall, the price per pound is actually a lot higher. In general, I recommend just doing the whole thing. But if the only thing available to you is to get a flat, of course you can smoke it up. Alrighty, night before we want to eat, and here is our brisket flat. This is a USDA choice brisket, which is honestly not what I go for. I would rather a prime, but this is what was available to me. This is about 4.75 pounds, which is about standard, I think, for a brisket flat. Now, disclaimer, guys, if this is your first time cooking anything on your smoker, you know what? You can do a full brisket. You don't need to get the flat. But I know that in some cases, this is all that's going to be available to you. So on your brisket flat, if you bought a full packer brisket, you would have a whole section over here called the point. There's a layer of fat that goes between the point sides, and it makes it so it's a little bit easier to cook. It's juicier. This is the flat, which is leaner, and in many cases is what people like to cook more. I don't know why. I'm a point guy. But the flat's pretty good too. Now the problem with the flat sometimes is they trim it kind of thin. Like right there, that's way too thin, honestly. But basically the rules for a brisket are you want to look at the fat side and you want to pull down the fat cap. So it's about 1/4 inch kind of. So this looks about right to me. Just slowly work your way cutting off till you get about 1/4 inch of fat. Quite often they will have trimmed it for you. I've noticed that's kind of pretty standard for flats. If you're buying this at a box store, like I did, I bought this at kind of our equivalent of Costco up here in the Northeast, and usually they just leave it untrimmed like this. But if you're buying it from your grocery store, it's probably going to be trimmed down, and they're going to charge you a pretty penny for that, but that's okay. This is what you have available, this is what you have available. So just slowly work your way trimming her down. Fun fact, guys, it's a lot easier to trim fat off when your meat is extremely cold. The warmer it is, the more your knife is not going to cut. It's just kind of slop around. All right, that's as far as I want to take it because I did scalp it here. You know what? I've cooked a lot of briskets in my life. I still scalp them every once in a while. It's not the end of the world, guys. But what we want to do here is look at the thickness. Now, if you look at the thickness of this brisket right here versus, let's say, over here. This is maybe a 1/2 inch, and this is at least 1 inch. Unfortunately, this is going to dry out before anything else does, so I'm just going to pull it. Some people will cook it, but honestly, I'd rather cut it off, put it into the freezer, and then next time I grind up some beef, just add this in. It's better than having like a very burned piece that no one wants to eat. But if you don't want to do that, certainly do whatever you want to do. But I tend to trim off any pieces like that. And in general, that looks okay over here. Like I said, scalped a couple spots. It's kind of a weird cut right here. If you go down any further, you're going to start getting into the meat. And I want to preserve this fat cap because this is the direction I'm going to have it to protect the meat from the flame. On the meat side, now, I know a lot of people that will work overtime to get off all of this membrane and stuff, the silver skin that's left over, yada, yada, yada. I am not that person. I used to be. And to be honest, this will burn off first. So it's not the end of the world to just leave most of this on here. If you're interested, you can take off as much as you want. There's no harm in taking it off. For me, though, I don't bother too much. I'm just going to go like so. That's okay. Maybe a little bit of this right here. And then I'm just going to square this off a little bit. There. And in general, this is pretty good. I think this is ready to go. Now we're going to come to our next step. Okay, dudes, if you are new to my channel, there's one thing that I preach all the time, and that is dry brining your meat before you put your rub on. When you put salt on your meat and you wait, it gets absorbed in. It makes your meat as salty as you want it to be. You can dial in what salt level you want. And then when you actually put your black pepper, your garlic, all that stuff, you leave more on the surface of the meat that's not being taken up by salt to get a better bark. It's honestly a win-win. The only downside is if you're using commercial rubs, you can't do it because they're full of salt. But if you make your own rubs, which you should, because it's pretty easy. You can absolutely salt your meat first and dial in how much salt you want. For me, I weigh my meat once it's been trimmed, and I will do approximately 1/2 teaspoon to 1 full teaspoon of kosher salt per pound of trimmed meat. That seems to work pretty well for me. If you watch some of my rib videos, I'll talk about bones and stuff, but in general, that's a good starting point. Now, I don't really pay too much attention to the fat side like this, because guess what? All that fat is going to make it very difficult to absorb, so I'm going to spend most of my effort on the meat side. You don't have to be ultra precise because the salt will disperse itself throughout the meat. Just try to get it kind of evenly coated on the exterior. You also don't have to worry about the sides or anything like that for a cut like this, because it's going to permeate into the meat. Boom. Once you have dry brined your meat, all we need to do is throw it into the fridge for, I don't know, half an hour to 2 hours until all that salt has been absorbed off the exterior. At that point, we can go ahead with putting on the rest of our rub. Okay, about a couple hours in, you can see that all the salt has been absorbed. Now, one of the other perks of doing it like this, where you put a dry brine on, is you can see all this moisture that's gotten pulled out. Now, it's just a side product of using salt, but what it also means is we do not need to use a binder because we have enough moisture already on the meat. Binders are kind of not necessary, guys. A lot of people still use them. If you want to use them, you do whichever you want to do. But what we're going to do, since we're not using a binder, again, use a binder if you want, we're going to coat everything down with a generous coating of coarse black pepper, which is the Texas way. And then I'm going to hit it with a lot of garlic powder because I love garlic powder. You could use paprika here. Some folks like to, instead of doing the dry brine, what they'll do is they'll hit it with a whole bunch of Lowry's. That's kind of one of those undisputed open secrets, of the barbecue world. A lot of the big places use that. Not for me, but it's pretty good if you want, some of that onion, paprika type stuff. Anyway, what we care about is the meat side. The fat side, the fat is going to start to drip, and a lot of the stuff you put on there might not make it. You'll get a good bark, trust me. We'll always get a good bark over here at the UFOBBQ, but you will get a better bark on the meat side than you will on the fat cap side, just because the fat cap is going to start melting and you're going to lose some of it. So focus on the meat side, which is why I did the fat cap side first, because that's what's going to sit on my wire rack. What we also want to do, guys, is get the sides. There's a lot of surface area on the sides, and there's a lot of good bites that come from the sides. In fact, some of my favorite bites from the sides, because that's that burned, kind of crusty edge. Get some really good flavor from there. But just coat everything down. Now, bark formation, guys, is one of those subjects where you can go really in depth, but the basics are really start from a cold temperature. So don't let your meat come up to room temperature before it goes in the smoker. Start from cold because that's when it absorbs the most amount of smoke. And then the bark is kind of a process where the moisture is going to get pulled out, and all the surface tension from your black pepper and your garlic granules, all that kind of stuff, it creates kind of like an up and down pattern when you get to a very small level on the meat. And that surface tension pulls moisture out and dries it out and creates that really good bark. That's why coarse black pepper is the norm rather than, some of the very thinly meshed stuff. But this is looking good. So what you want to do now is throw it back in the fridge. This could absolutely go on the smoker just like this. For me, I'm going to smoke this up starting tomorrow morning. It's a smaller cut of meat. I don't need to go overnight with this. So we'll get out there maybe about 7 a.m. and we'll start this cook. It is 8 a.m. Kettle is up to temperature at 250 degrees, which means it's time to toss this brisket flat on. Now, when I'm cooking brisket, I usually look for probably an idea of somewhere around 1.5 hours to 2 hours per pound. This is somewhere just south of 5 pounds before I trimmed it, so let's call it 4.5. So we're looking at early afternoon, probably this will be done. I'm going to put on my kettle with that thicker fat cap facing the flame. In general, whatever your smoker is, make sure that your fat is between you and your heat source. In this case, heat's going to come across, go out through the vents, so I want to have fat side up. And we're just going to let this run between the 250, 275 range until the bark sets. Then we'll come back and we'll talk about that. But good thing to note, guys, if you're going to put wood on, put it on as you're heating up your kettle so it's close to that combustion point. That'll get you a better smoke. So whenever I put wood onto the fire, I always throw another chunk on. Anyway, this looks good. We'll come back in a bit when it's time to take the next step. And my internal temperature is actually about 170 degrees. Now, normally 170 is about the point where I would wrap it to get through the stall. But when you wrap it, you want to make sure that your bark is set. On a much larger, a packer brisket, that wouldn't really be a problem because that stall would be hours and hours into the cook, and we'd have a nice set bark. At this point, my bark is not set on this small brisket, so I'm going to let it keep running. We want everything to be nice and dry, and when you kind of move your finger across it like that, none of the bark is coming off. So I want my bark to set, then we'll wrap it. Don't worry about temperature, it'll be fine. But we're just going to let it keep going and push through the stall, at least until we get a, like I said, a nice bark. There's some pooling on here, just kind of, the brisket is kind of bending upwards, which is a little strange. There's some pooling, I'm just kind of taking that off. That'll help with bark. If there's a big pool there, you're not going to get your bark, obviously. But keep throwing smoke on. It's still absorbing smoke. It's only been 2.5 hours. And we'll let it keep running. We are about 5 hours in. And we're pushing through the stall. We're about 171 internal right now. I probably would wrap if this was a bigger brisket, but honestly, this is not where I want it. So the bark is not set yet. So I am not going to wrap. I'm just going to keep pushing. We might honestly just go straight through the stall without wrapping at all. But bark is more important than cooking faster. So just going to let it keep doing its thing. Once this bark is set, I might wrap it. Otherwise, just let it keep going. It's not hurting anything. I got plenty of time. At this point, about 5 hours in, I'm not sure how much more smoke you're going to pull in. You can absolutely keep putting more chunks of wood on, but I'll probably stop around this point. About 5 hours is about the max smoke. Honestly, this cut of meat is going to absorb. Anyway, I'll come back and show you guys when I go on to the next step. 6 hours in, and we are temping in the 180s. But most importantly, this bark has finally set. You can see nothing's pulling off, which means I'm going to wrap it. So let's go inside. Let's wrap this sucker up. Then we'll throw it back on and take it to the finish line. Now, just like all my briskets, this is going to get wrapped up in some butcher's paper. I'm going to put some extra fat in here. This is just beef tallow. You don't have to put extra fat in, but since we're doing a flat, it could use some extra moisture compared to doing a point. But pretty simply, you could just plop it right on top of your fat, but you can also just roll it. So I'm going to just flip this sucker over, just like so. Fold her in. Flip her over again, fold her up, and this can go on just like this. Now it's going to go back onto the smoker, keep it at the same temp, and now we're looking for probe tender. I put my probe back in and start really testing around something like 195. The temperature will be somewhere in that 195 to just about 200 and 202 max, but this is the temperature we're looking for. We're looking for consistency, guys. We're looking for probe tender. But let's throw her back onto the smoker. Here we are about 8 hours in, which is a little longer than I thought it was going to take, but you know what? It is what it is. And we are probing pretty tender, guys. Probe tender honestly means it's kind of like putting the probe into a hot stick of butter. Just goes straight through. Temperature, we're at 198, which seems right to me. This is ready to rest. Now we're going to take it inside and we're going to rest it. If I'm doing a full packer brisket, I like to put it into a pre-warmed cooler. So basically you take a cooler, put hot water in there, really hot water, let the whole thing get really nice and hot. Throw it in there with some towel. It'll stay perfect for a long time. This size little brisket flat, this can go directly into my toaster oven, which will hold it at about 130 degrees until we're ready to eat. You can let it rest for anywhere between an hour to 12 hours, honestly. It should be fine. But I'm going to take it out, let it rest, and that's going to let all the juices recompile. It's a really important step, guys. Always let your brisket rest. But I'm going to get this inside, and we'll come back when we actually cut it. All right, so because of some technical difficulties, I started chopping up my brisket. I thought I had recorded actually the slicing for you guys, but no dice. Either way, here's a little bit of it left. Let me show you what we're working with. Very nice smoke ring on here. Looks really good. That good accordion style on there. Oof, falling apart. Delicious. Sorry about that, but this is going to be delicious in chopped sandwiches, which was my intention. Either way, even though I'm eating a piece, let's see how we did, guys. Now, brisket flats are a lot leaner, so your likelihood of drying it out actually increases pretty significantly. So cooking a brisket flat might be cheaper, but it's actually harder than cooking a whole brisket. It's kind of paradoxical, but trust me, it really is. If you're gonna cook a brisket flat, try and get a full flat and do something over 4 pounds. The more the merrier. Honestly, like those little 2-pound ones, the little strips that they sell, don't even bother. Those are really hard to smoke well. You can do it, but it's very easy to dry them out. On our brisket today, we basically just cooked it like I would a full brisket. I threw it on there in the morning. I prepped it with some salt, garlic powder, and coarse black pepper like I do all my briskets. I went on this morning and I just smoked it with a whole bunch of smoke and let it just run until the point where I felt the bark had set, and then we wrapped it. Then we let it go all the way through the stall until the point where we actually thought it was probe tender. Probe tender means if you stick your probe in, it'll kind of be like hot butter with a little bit of hesitation, but just pretty smooth overall. Once you've done it once, trust me, you'll get it. And then we took it out and we put it into my toaster oven and let it sit there for several hours. You can go anywhere from an hour to like 12 hours at that point. I like to do for my full briskets a roto mold cooler that I have pre-warmed up with boiling hot water. Throw it in there a little bit beforehand. Let the cooler get nice and hot, and then you just wrap your meat inside of the butcher paper in a towel and just throw it in there. It'll sit for 6-7 hours, easy peasy. But this brisket is now done. It has a beautiful bark on there, which if you watch this video, I was a little concerned about. Beautiful bark, smells great, really good smoke ring on there. Look at that, delicious. We smoked this with basically all post oak on top of our Weber kettle. But most importantly, even though I already ate a piece, if you watched earlier, still got to get the old-fashioned chomp. It's a great looking cook of brisket. Let's see how we did, guys. Tastes like brisket flat. Can't complain, guys. It's no different than cooking it with the whole packer brisket. It just takes a little bit more carefulness just to make sure you don't dry it out. But in reality, it's a perfect brisket. If this is your first time, guys, don't sweat it. It's really not that difficult. Just focus on your temperatures. Don't let it dry out. Keep watching when it gets past that 190 degrees. Don't let it go over 200, and you'll be fine. And the rest always helps you. The longer the rest, the better. Don't go over 12 hours, but anywhere between 1 and 12, you're good to go. Keep it in a nice warm temperature, and you'll do fine. But most importantly, guys, get out there and cook something fantastic, whether it's a brisket or not, and let me know what you're cooking down below. Love to hear from you. As always, I'll catch you guys on the next UFO barbecue, and can't wait to eat some brisket. Bye-bye.